Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, including places like Cold Omaha and Zone Coverage. He is Mr. Arif, Mr. Useful Human. Mr. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks. How are you?
I am doing fantastically well. It is a very nice and warm evening in the frozen tundra, and that means grilling. So did a lot of bit of grilling tonight, and had a little bit of fun with that, and did a little something different tonight I'd never done before, and we'll actually get to that a little bit later in the questions in the mailbag. But I'm kind of a marinade person and kind of a spice person when it comes to chicken. So when it comes to stuff on the grill, so I had a little bit of fun with that tonight.
All right.
I'd never.
I had a hot dog from Five Guys, so it was actually better than that sounds.
Well,
but yeah,
a Five Guys hot dog is a certain level above a normal hot dog.
Yeah,
like just your regular like kosher, packed whatever from a Cub or something. So, nope, I totally agree. Five Guys things tend to be better than most things. Like the Five Guys burger, I like better than most like burgers that you can get at like a fast food place. And the fries are, despite the fact
the fries are phenomenal.
Yeah, despite the fact the fries are a little soggy, the fries are fantastic. The taste on those is just great, which I believe we've gone on a rant about that before. But welcome to the show. We are back to the weekly stuff right now. We are deep. We are knee deep. Knee deep? ACL deep? Let's go ACL deep. We are ACL deep in training camp, and we've got lots of stuff to talk about. Lots of rumor and innuendo, apparently. A couple of four-letter words, and some camp, and even a game to kind of preview. So, but before all that, again, thank you guys for listening. If you enjoy the show, you can do what Evan Creed did and donate to the show. You can do it in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, and you can donate there. That is, of course, a one-time donation. Or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. That's more of a monthly subscription. You can do anything you want. If you want $1 a month, if you'd like to do Tree Fitty a month to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, $5 does in fact get you a sticker as well to get sent out to you. So Evan Creed sent out a donation. He sent a nice little donation that was Tree Fitty to the power of 2 to ward off higher power Loch Ness monsters. That is appreciated. Those exist, and those are dangerous. Those are quite deadly. So again, thank you, Evan. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you do enjoy the show, please share it on social media. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook. Send this anywhere you'd like. We really do appreciate the listens and the love you guys have given us over the years. So again, thank you guys so much. Also, a reminder, as we mentioned last show, we are drawing for the Fantasy Football League Draft. We are famous for our negative 25-point rule for extra point kickers who miss. So, if you would like to get in on this insanity, and I do not suggest that you do, I am doing it because of habit at this point. Arif is roped into it, and I believe that if this show were to stop, he'd still wake up in a cold sweat thinking about this particular rule in this particular league. So we're all just kind of stuck with it now. But if you would like in on the Norse Code Fantasy Football League and all of its insanity, you can email norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And you can also send us something on Twitter. You can. I would prefer a DM, just so it doesn't get lost in the Twitter replies. So all of that aside, we have a show to get to. And the first thing that we want to say is that the Minnesota Vikings are not trading Anthony Barr, and we're certainly not creating a rumor to squash either. So, no, we are not trading Anthony Barr. Right? Maybe?
Right.
Kind of?
Okay. So to give people a very, very tiny bit of the inside baseball in the media room. So when this happened, obviously, Zimmer comes out. So we were scheduled to have George Edwards at our presser today, or that day. And Zimmer kind of preempts it and says there's not going to be a George Edwards presser. I'm going to do the presser, which is like super unusual, right? Why would he volunteer? He hates doing pressers. Which is not to say he necessarily hates the media. I mean, he actually does a bunch of like one-on-one sort of off to the side kind of stuff. But it was just, he hates doing pressers. So it was very confusing. And then he comes out before anyone asks a question. A lot of people seem to be under the impression that this question was asked of him. No, before anyone asks a question, he comes out and says, hey, I want to address a rumor out there that we're going to trade Anthony Barr. Absolutely not. We're not going to trade Anthony Barr. The only reason he was out yesterday is because he tweaked a hamstring. And this by itself is like already kind of confusing because he doesn't address rumors. He doesn't.
It's way, way out of character.
Right.
This might have actually pissed him off.
Right. Like, even if it's a rumor that's like kind of made up, we're bringing in Mike Vick or something, right? He's like, we won't comment on that, right? Like, he's not going to say, absolutely not, right? But he comes out and he says, we're not doing this, which is like super unusual. But the second unusual thing is that this rumor didn't exist. Like, no one had mentioned it. Zone Coverage never reported it. Daily Norseman never reported it. And then the people who actually matter also didn't report it. So 1500 ESPN didn't report it. Star Tribune, Pioneer Press, The Athletic, none of them reported it. No one with any audience or credibility had reported it, and none of the blogs that were there. So like Vikings Corner and Climbing the Pocket, none of them had mentioned this. And we couldn't figure out what it was. Like, maybe, someone on KFan read a tweet from someone suggesting that they should trade Anthony Barr, that Anthony Barr is being held out for it. But no one on KFan was saying this is what it means. They were just saying, they were reading a thing that someone had sent them in. So like, that's kind of the closest we got. So it was really bizarre. And Zimmer got ahead of a thing that didn't exist and created it. And so, yeah, right. So it feels very like we have no intent to trade Percy Harvin. You're like, oh wait, hey.
So they're trading Percy Harvin. It reminded me a bit of the musical because I'm going to show my whatever here. Hamilton.
Oh, don't do that.
Well, yeah, Hamilton. When he admitted a scandal that was not actually being investigated or being talked about, and everybody like, wait, what? Wait, what are you talking about? No one's accused you of that at all. All right. So let's talk about the Anthony Barr situation then, shall we?
Right, yeah. So, honestly, I don't think a trade's happening, but like, what?
Everybody seems to all the questions in the mailbag, if we can just sum them up if there's a theme to it, everybody wants to trade someone for offensive line help. So, yeah. Let's move to the second big story of the week, which is your laughter is the telling part of all of this, is Richie Incognito, who, according to sources on Twitter, the rumor in Innuendo is that he had been talking to Tony Sperano before he passed, and he wanted to bring him on the team. And Zimmer is flat out denying the team had any interest. I don't think he's addressed the Sperano thing at all, but he's said that the team had no interest, and you can tweet that. So it was tweeted. And apparently Richie Incognito is in a Twitter war with Mike Zimmer, calling him all sorts of wonderful names. Arif, what the hell do we know about the Richie Incognito thing?
Okay, yeah. So the source on the original reporting is Richie Incognito in an interview with TMZ. And not like
how
an
convenient
interview. Yeah, right.
Their relationship is already off to a good start.
Yeah, right, exactly. But like, he sat down with TMZ, and in that interview he was like, oh yeah, I've got a passion for politics and I want to enter politics. So that was alarming itself. But then he says a couple of teams reached out to him, the Vikings, Seattle, but I don't want to go to training camp, right? So it's like kind of like, I'll just show up when if either of these teams needs me, kind of the deadline, like Favre-esque kind of thing. So that comes out, and like 1500, puts out a piece, and then a couple of other people put out pieces saying, Incognito said he was contacted by Minnesota, and so then Zimmer, now forced to confront an actual rumor that has some credibility attached to it, in that a player said that, was like, no, we had no interest ever. So
this is not a thing.
Yeah, very emphatic. And I can believe that, right? I was arguing that like Richie Incognito is like a terrible fit for the Vikings. Not from like schematic or whatever, right? Like he'd actually be an enormous upgrade. He can play in whatever scheme, but who cares?
Yeah, it's definitely more of a cultural situation at this point.
Right. And I think that the Vikings have an ethical imperative not to sign him because he's a racist psycho. So yeah. It's weird, right? But at least, this happened and he emphatically denied it. And actually, this is kind of so the first time Zimmer addressed a rumor, he made the story. The second time he addressed the rumor, I think this would have killed the story, right? In fact, we were walking out of the media room saying, well, it was fun while it lasted. That story's dead. Like, we weren't like, let's write about this some more. Zimmer said a thing very aggressively, and that's always our story. No, we thought the story was dead, right? And so actually he did the right thing in this case. But then Richie Incognito tweets out 5 separate screenshots of a text conversation that he has with CS, coach. I believe it's Coach Sperano. He later clarified that's who it was. And then his 6th tweet was Coach Zimmer is a liar. Some choice curse words in there. I never know what we should do on the show regarding curse words because
we've avoided it fairly well, yeah. And it's one of those things where it kind of slips like later in the show.
Yeah, right. We this just is pretty early on.
Yeah,
so.
we just it's the difference between the show that starts at 8 and the show that starts at 9. Like right? the 8 o'clock show is completely different from the 9 o'clock show. Enjoy the veal, so enjoy the cursing later in the show. Right. But yeah, there was a very nice 4-letter word in there.
He calls Mike Zimmer a liar, and
yes.
If you take a look at which first of all, that takes some cojones because it's Mike Zimmer. He doesn't lie. He tells the truth to an enormous fault. In fact, actually, there's a really good piece about how telling the truth has helped more than hurt Mike Zimmer by 1500 ESPN. I'll link that in the show notes. That's actually a positive thing I can finally link thus far, given our conversation. Right. But yeah, it's crazy to call Zimmer a liar because he doesn't. And the one time he lied, he said, we're not playing Terrence Newman at safety, he apologized. But that's the kind of lie coaches tell all the time. And so him apologizing for it was also notable. So he calls Mike Zimmer a liar and then he releases these texts. But you take a look at the text and it's very one-sided, right? It's just like Incognito saying, all right, the Bills released me. They asked me to take a pay cut. I said no. So they just released me. So I'm available, coach. It's him texting the late Tony Sperano. And Sperano's like, okay, thanks. And then he goes on. He's like, I'm hanging out with one of your boys. And it's a picture of him and I think Fadi Odenigbo or Denebo, which how did they know each other? They didn't go to the same school. They don't live in the same city. They never were on the same team. But yeah, okay, whatever, sure. So he's hanging out with a Fadi, and then at least we think it's a Fadi. That's what the media room thought.
I like how suddenly this turned into the scene from High Fidelity where Cusack is running around going, she lives in an Ian-less universe.
Yeah, right.
There is no Ian at her work. There is no Ian of her friends. Who could it? Oh, Tim Robbins.
But yeah, he's texting Sperano, and Sperano's not responding all that much. He's like, oh, lol, okay. Which is I didn't really expect him to say, lulls, but sure. And then he's like, oh, yeah, it looks like Kirk could use some protection, which accurate, fair. And Sperano was like, yeah, Skol Vikings. He wasn't like, we'd love to have you. He's like, Skol Vikings. And he's like, yeah, I'd love to help you guys out. Let me know. And Sperano's like, keep working. It was the closest he got was you never know, right? But it wasn't. That's not. Hiring you. It
reminds me of this meme I saw recently that said something along the lines of, just about every woman has a one-sided conversation in her inbox somewhere. And
yeah, right.
It's basically this of just hey, I'm available. Hey, just letting you know that I'm around. Hey, I was hanging with your boy. I was thinking about you guys. So if you guys are looking for somebody, looking for a little protection, just let me know. Totally a one-sided conversation. He's just like, yeah, Skol.
Right, yeah. Which actually it is kind of cute that Sperano tweeted or texted Skull Vikings, which I like that. But yeah, it was weird, and then he releases this conversation that he's had, which I 100% believe that it's like a real conversation, because if you were going to fake a conversation, it would be a lot more like affirmative than that. It would be a lot more like, yeah, we'd love to have you. Let me talk to someone.
Yeah,
but
this was just bereft of all, like, I don't know,
right,
thought
like, there's
process, any sort of creativity.
Right. So yeah, that happened, and then that was his proof that Zimmer's a liar, I guess. So I think Incognito lost that exchange.
I can't wait for Mike Zimmer's rap disc to come out tomorrow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're gonna cancel the presser, and then
he's just gonna release
drop a diss track.
He's gonna drop a diss track on SoundCloud. It's gonna be great.
But yeah, so that's the Incognito thing
in all of its glory.
Yeah, it would have been a somewhat interesting show if also like the Incognito was still in play, so I could like rant about all the things that he's done that make him like a bad person. And I mean like a bad person. Like I don't mean like he's made a couple of mistakes. Like I genuinely think that he is like a bad person in his soul. So I'm reading his intent. I am magic. I can read minds.
Yes.
And that's the judgment I came up with. But we don't have to do that because like, if there was any interest, the Vikings squashed it, and if there was any remnant of an interest in the potential future, Incognito squashed it.
So that is how a story begins to breathe life, flies like a wonderful butterfly, and then gets splatted by a speeding vehicle. So that is how a story grows and dies. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Well, let's move to camp for just a moment, and we are still in training camp. Things are going fairly well. Let's talk about the stuff that's jumping out at you. How are we looking?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that's jumping out, like I'm not typically looking at the starters, but I'm genuinely concerned about the offensive line. I'm going to be writing my notebook tonight to incorporate kind of all the observations I've had about camp. And one of the things that bothers me is, so of course, 3 interior offensive linemen are injured and the 3 backups are not doing well. I actually am not going to talk that much about it in terms of my concerns about the offensive line because there's no indication that any of those are long-term injuries. Now, obviously, if you're like a cynical Vikings fan, which you have all the right in the world to be given their history, you'd say there's no indication that those injuries are short-term, except for maybe Elfline. But I'll choose the optimist sort of approach, which I am famously well known for when it comes to the Vikings.
Incredibly so.
Right. And so there's no indicators that those are kind of long-term issues. And for right now, even though I'm the most worried about Easton because he had to seek a second opinion for a back and neck issue, which if you're seeking a second opinion, it probably means the first opinion wasn't great and it's a neck and back issue. So that's the one I'm most worried about. But for now, I'm going to assume that all 5 of those starters are going to start. I am really worried about the offensive tackles. Rashad Hill, a lot of people is not the greatest right tackle in the world. He's certainly not as bad as, say, TJ Clemmings or Eric Flowers or anything like that. But he's also, below average. And so that's a concern. But a lot of people expect Riley Reif to get better. And I think that's fair. He's had a lot of good years at left tackle. He's had the past couple of years he's been a little bit injured, which has kind of impacted his level of play. And we've seen some players who've complained about injury impacting their level of play bounce back and turn in some really good seasons like John Sullivan. And some players are Matt Khalil, right? So you don't know kind of what you're getting when you've got a couple of seasons of injury kind of maybe explaining some bad play. But we do know Riley Reif has played well in the past without those injuries at left tackle. Unfortunately, he's not playing very well in camp. In fact, it could be argued that his matchups against Everson Griffin result in more problems than Rashad Hill's matchups against Daniil Hunter. And I don't think anyone is talking about this. And I think this is a huge concern. We're seeing it a bunch in 11s. We're seeing it a bunch in one-on-ones. And if Everson Griffin, who I don't think is the best 4-3 defensive end in the league, although he played like it for the first half of the season before his injury. But if Everson Griffin was like Von Miller good or J.J. Watt good, I would still be concerned at the regularity at which this pressure is coming. Like, he'd have to basically be Reggie White this season, which, yeah, maybe, sure. But I think it's more likely that a player who has struggled the past 2 seasons will continue to struggle. I'm very worried about what Riley Reif is doing. So that's standing out to me. But that's only the negatives, and I'm an optimist, as we've just established. So let's talk about some of the good things. I think Laquan Treadwell is looking a lot better. And that he's in a position to contribute as a third receiver. I think Brandon Zylstra is playing better than Kendall Wright. There's kind of a sort of a rumor, not a rumor, because that implies sourcing. There's a belief kind of floating around among the media watching training camp that Kendall Wright may not survive the cuts. So it's not that we've heard anything from the Vikings. It's more that we're watching him and he's just not performing very well. And there's no guaranteed money left on his contract. So Kendall Wright may not survive the cuts, and so you would need someone to play better than him for that to be kind of worth it. And I think the sort of undrafted rookie free agent, but really CFL pro, Brandon Zylstra, is playing really well. And he's 25. He's not like incredibly young or anything like that. In fact, he's older than Stephon Diggs. But it is, he still is lacking kind of critical NFL experience. And it's good that he, I think, is playing well. I don't know if that means he'll be able to contribute right away, but it's nice to see. So that's kind of standing out. Also, Dalvin Cook looks just as good as he did last year in camp. And one of the things is that, generally speaking, I don't like to comment on running backs all that much in training camp, just because it's very difficult to evaluate some of the things that matter for running backs, especially without contact. But now that I've been able to take a lot of video of practice and break down a lot of video of practice, I feel a little more comfortable doing that. And Dalvin Cook looks amazing. And he's one of the guys that when you watch in person, you can kind of see why people hold him in such high regard. A lot of people said the same thing about Adrian Peterson, and I think that was fair back in like 2012 in camp. I mean, he looked stunning as a player. Most running backs, you can't tell, even if they're really, really good running backs. And I think the same thing is true of Dalvin Cook, who looks phenomenal and explosive and really well balanced and has a lot of agility. So there's that. And then I haven't gleaned a lot from the tight ends. I'll say David Morgan looks like he's blocking better than he has in the past, but it's camp, so who knows? I think that Cousins and Rudolph are still trying to work on their chemistry. And I think it wasn't until today that I was kind of comfortable with what Cousins had figured out Kyle Rudolph's catch radius was. He was kind of estimating it to be too low, and he kept on throwing it into contested situations that were favorable for defenders when it came to targeting Rudolph. And today that wasn't the case, and that was nice. But I think they have got a lot of work to work on. Defensively, I am liking a lot of what I'm seeing. Sheldon Richardson looks phenomenal. Daniil Hunter looks great. Everson Griffin apparently looks like Reggie White, so that's cool too. But, Linval looks like Linval. He took the day off today, but overall he looks really good. The thing that's really surprising to me on the defensive line is Ifeadi Odenigbo. I keep pronouncing his last name differently than how most people are pronouncing it. But he got moved to defensive tackle, and I was able to kind of focus in on him over the last couple of days since I wrote that story on him, and he looks really good. He's like killing some of these guards. Now, a bunch of guards got moved up the depth chart when they otherwise wouldn't have. So, who knows, right? But he looks really good. Like, the first step is to look like you're good at it. And then the second step is to do it against like really good competition. And while he doesn't have an opportunity for that second step until maybe the preseason game, that first step is looking great. He's won, I think, more one-on-ones than any other defensive lineman I've charted. Which a lot of that has to obviously do with the strength of his opponent. But a lot of it just has to do with just how often he's winning as a defensive tackle again. And he is probably going to get washed out in the run game when it comes to NFL level play, because he's not going to get above 280 pounds. He told me he was at 275. And that's lighter than Tom Johnson, who got washed out a ton against the run, basically until his final year with Minnesota. I think that Odenigbo is kind of the most exciting story coming out of that second group. Tayshaun Bauer looks really good. Odenigbo is really exciting. Jaleel Johnson looks pretty good. Odenigbo is exciting, right? Stephen Weatherly has not been as impressive to me. They just released their depth chart today, and they have like Bauer and Weatherly kind of co-listed as the fourth defensive end, with Brian Robinson as the third defensive end. Sure. So that's kind of what's happening on the line. The cornerbacks, Rhodes looks great. Had a couple of picks today before giving up a couple of bad passes to Diggs and Zylstra, of all people. But overall, had a really good practice and a set of practices. Waynes looked really good a couple of days ago. Today wasn't looking as good, but he wasn't looking bad either. And so his highs are really high and his lows are like average. And I think that's a really great place for him to be. Mackenzie Alexander looks better than ever. He looks really good. And I want to stress that he looks really, really, really good before I say this next thing, which is that Mike Hughes is playing better than him. He looks phenomenal. I think Hughes is already a better player than Waynes is. And this is after I've kind of adjusted my expectation of Waynes as a player who is now playing at an above average level. So Hughes is really good. I was going to save this take for my notes, but I might as well just put it out here and put it in a couple of places. I think if Hughes was playing on another team where he could get 1,000 snaps as a starter, he'd be a front runner for Defensive Rookie of the Year based off of what I'm seeing in camp. Obviously, a million things could happen, right? And camp performances don't always translate to NFL performances. But given our priors, we should probably expect that to translate because he's a first-round pick for a national championship winning team. And he's picked up systems super fast in his last three spots at UCF, at his community college, and at North Carolina. He's incredible. He was some people's cornerback one. So the idea that he could be Defensive Rookie of the Year on another team shouldn't be that controversial. But now, based off of what I've seen, I think that he may potentially have the ability to play at that level. So he looks stunningly good. And I'm going to answer a question that was either sent to me directly or was a mailbag question here, which is, knowing that Hughes is looking great right now, would you say that you are now more okay with the Vikings picking him and missing out on an offensive lineman than before? And I think the answer is still no. Because while I do think Hughes is better than Trey Waynes and will probably replace Trey Waynes next year, and it kind of depends on what they want to do with Alexander in that case, or replace Alexander next year and extend Waynes, although it'd be cheaper to do the first thing. I think that the cap savings you get from replacing a veteran contract with a rookie contract and plus the added value of just having a better player is still not as good as having a good guard there. And that's despite the fact that cornerback is, according to PFF, the most important defensive position, and guard is one of the least important, if not the least important, besides tight end and fullback, the least important position on offense. Even all that said, a guy who's playing guard for 1,000 snaps is going to be more important to you for the next 3 years than a guy who's playing corner for maybe 200 snaps this year, and then only giving you the additional value over Waynes for the next 2-3 years. So even knowing that Hughes is playing at this Defensive Rookie of the Year potentially level, I still think that the Vikings made a mistake. But if Hughes is that good, right? If they think he's the top corner in the draft and he falls all the way to 30, and they would have picked him at 5 or whatever, then they should have made plans to leap up to pick 50 or something, and I've been more aggressive about it because this offensive line thing is obviously a huge problem. Okay, back to evaluating the rest of the defense. Holton Hill looks good, not great, and then at safety it's always difficult to tell. I kind of like Trey Matthews, but whatever. At linebacker, Barr and Kendricks look fine. They look great. They look like they know what they're doing. Eric Wilson looks phenomenal, and I think that he's playing at a level in camp, again, same caveats apply, where he could potentially be playing as a starter for another team that would be weak at linebacker. So, for example, if he was in Green Bay right now, he'd be, I think, playing with the starting position. It helps that Jake Ryan is injured, so there's a starting position open. But I think that he's playing at a starting level linebacker level of play, where last year I didn't think that was the case. He was just fast and kind of good. But now he's playing really instinctively. And this is what I love about being able to watch a couple of days worth of videos that I've taken, is that I can say, he's reading his keys really quickly. He's not getting fooled by play action as much as someone like Kentrell Brothers is. He's getting to screens quickly, which is really important in this scheme for linebackers to do. And he's blowing up blocks, which is great. He's getting to the ball carrier at or behind the line of scrimmage a lot. So I really like what Eric Wilson is doing. But yeah, those are that's kind of the landscape of things. I think I've answered most of the big questions people would have about the different positions at training camp. So hopefully Oh, I didn't talk about quarterbacks that much. Cousins looks fine. Again, it hasn't changed from the last podcast.
Not so much, no.
No, I mean he's still not taking too many shots downfield, and I'm still not that concerned about it. It's just very annoying. When he has taken shots, sometimes they're very accurate, and whoever it is just happens to drop the pass. That already happened once today again, and then there was one day where it just kept happening. But he's also been like wildly like. When he misses, it's an overthrow, and it's putting receivers in a really difficult spot to reel in those catches when a better placement would have had. So he looks kind of like as advertised deep. The issue is that he doesn't seem as aggressive deep and is really aggressively taking those checkdowns. So I guess that's a bother. I would say there's not many significant lowlights, and the lowlights I've seen do not concern me yet. There was a miscommunication near interception to Harrison Smith a couple of days ago, but that was miscommunication, right? There wasn't a player in the area, so either the receiver or Cousins needed a better understanding of what they wanted to do in that situation. There have been a couple of miscommunications. It's not at the level of like when Tony Romo was playing with Des Bryant for the first time, and they just like kept missing each other like 3 times a game for a while. It's not like that. So yeah, there are lowlights that are not that big. There are highlights until kind of today. They weren't that big. His best throw in camp was a couple of days ago when he just threaded a needle through triple coverage deep to Diggs, which was great. And then Diggs drops it. He is still kind of garbo in 2-minute drills, and I want that to improve. And that's, I guess, my biggest concern about that. I mean, it's real bad.
There was a great tweet that came out about Delvin Cook dropping a ball right in front of Xavier Rhodes and falling to the ground, just going, "Oh God, why did this happen?" Like helmet first down to the ground, and Xavier just walks over with the ball and just drops it on his head.
Yes, that did happen.
Like, how comedic, just like bonk. Yeah. You got what you deserved there. Back in the old days, you'd be doing push-ups.
Right, exactly.
So all of that, all the training camp stuff, and really, if just as a side note, if Kirk Cousins really wanted to take a look at what Rudolph was capable of, all he'd really need to do is watch the season where Bradford, not last year but the year before, just used him as a check down machine for most of the season. You're like, this is exactly where you can get the ball to Brad. This is exactly where you can get to Rudolph.
Right.
This is
watch the Bradford film and check down.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, this guy set a record. Okay, this guy set a record for completions in the NFL, like completion percentage, and for a reason. There was a lot of check downs, and Rudolph was definitely a nice addition for that, or a nice receiver for that. So we actually have a game to talk about. We will be playing the Broncos in Denver, and I guess the big question is, first teamers in the first game rarely play. If they do, it's one series. So who will be seeing extended time out there, and who should we be looking at?
Right, so it might even be up to 2 series based off of a tweet I saw today. Again, not a ton, but 2 series, that's twice as many series. And that would be interesting, right? Because we all know that the Broncos have like this really stellar defense, but I think that they've got an underrated offense. And it's not just because they've got, MVP Case Keenum in there. It's because they've got kind of a lot of things going for them this year that they may not have had in previous years, including like an actual quarterback who may not be, in my opinion, all that great, but better than the guy who's playing as the Vikings backup right now, I guess. It is a revenge game, of course. You've got Trevor Siemian getting revenge, Kyle Sluter getting revenge, Tremaine Brock getting revenge. So
much revenge going on here.
Yeah, and then a guy named Case Keenum getting revenge. But yeah, I think that there's kind of a lot of dynamic elements to this Broncos offense that would be pretty good to test the Vikings defense. I think Cortland Sutton is having this phenomenal rookie camp, according to Broncos writers. Like it's up there with any set of rookie reports that you're hearing. I guess Anthony Miller is kind of up there. Mike Gesicki is up there. But the reviews I'm hearing about Cortland Sutton are just phenomenal. He's already worked his way up to that third receiver spot. So we'll see Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Cortland Sutton really attack the Vikings secondary in a way that's going to be pretty revealing, which is nice. They're not going to have a bunch of tight ends. Jeff Hoyerman's injured. Troy Fumagalli's injured. Jake Butt is, I guess, not injured, which is new. Also, his name is Butt. So there's that. Their offensive line looks really good. They've got Garrett Bowles, who had a really good rookie season, Ronald Leary, the former Cowboys guard, Matt Paradis, who's had really good seasons, Jared Veldier at right tackle, and kind of the only big issue seems to be at right guard. So that's a good way to test that Vikings defensive line for that couple of series. And then, of course, we know that the Broncos have a stellar pass rush, which they've upgraded by adding Bradley Chubb. They've got a pretty good linebacker in Brandon Marshall. I guess Todd Davis is starting instead of Josie Jewell, but there's been really, really good reports about Jewell coming out of camp. And then they've got a great set of corners. They've got Bradley Roby and then Chris Harris, who is one of the best corners in the league. In fact, I think Mac Alexander named him as the best slot corner in the league, along with two other guys. So because it's kind of part of Mackenzie Alexander's kind of redemption tour, I've finally embraced slot corners, and I watched a bunch of them, and one of his favorite is Chris Harris. And then the safeties, I think, both have a ton of potential, so it'll be interesting to see that. So the Broncos starters all offer really cool tests, I think, for the Vikings that and basically kind of at every level that you'd want to test the Vikings on offense and defense. I guess the interior of the Broncos run game could be a little bit soft. D'Amato Peck was their nose tackle. Adam Gotsis is out and injured. And Derek Wolfe is getting up there in age. So, maybe the guards doing well in the run game is not going to be as indicative of anything, but it's still nice to have. What is really interesting is what's going to happen when you've got the second team in there, because I think the Broncos, based off of who I think is going to be playing, have got a pretty good second team unit in some areas and obviously not in other areas. But they've got Deshaun Hamilton, they've got Royce Freeman, D'Angelo Henderson, who's been having a great camp. We'll probably see more Cortland Sutton even with the second team. And that's going to be really good to test that second set of the secondary. Obviously, it'll be like Paxton Lynch throwing to them, which is like not as great. He's not even having a good camp. So there's only so much you can test there. And that offensive line behind that first set of offensive linemen is not great either. Cyrus Kwanjo, Billy Turner, Menelik Watson, a bunch of people that you're not super excited about. But it will be interesting to see kind of what Ifadi can do in that scenario. Defensively, that really deep defense is going to do a lot, I think, to potentially test the Vikings offense. Like I said, Josie Jewell's been having a really good camp. He's not the most athletic linebacker, but they've got kind of an opposite linebacker with Zaire Anderson that you can test in a couple of different ways. And then they've got Shane Ray and Shaquille Barrett rushing the passer. I think Clinton McDonald is going to be in that rotation with the second defensive line. If not, you've got, DeMarcus Walker, Zach Kerr, who I like a lot, and Shelby Harris. So there's a lot going on there. Isaac Yadam is probably their starting kick returner. He's also in their second string cornerback group. And then Tremaine Brock, I think, is their nickel corner. So he'll be with their first team nickel and maybe their second team outside corner. And so hopefully the receivers can beat Brock. Because he was bad enough last year that if he shuts them down this year, I'd be a little worried. And then at safety, they've got Sua Cravens, who played really well for Washington when he wanted to play. So, and not even like a Randy Moss, when I want to play well, I'll play well. Just like literally I don't want to play. And so he didn't. So, but he played well when he was playing.
I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, well, apparently there might have been an option for Corey Coleman, who's traded to the Bills. And Adam Schefter tweeted out, after mulling his options, Corey Coleman decides to report to camp. And it's like, are you going to hold out? I mean, you got traded for a conditional 7th. Like, what?
He just didn't want to show up and do like wind sprints like they're doing out in Detroit.
Losing the locker room.
That is a good way to lose a locker room.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the second team Broncos defense and to some extent the third team defense will offer some interesting tests based on who they have. The second team offense has a couple of interesting players I kind of like, and the offensive line is like a huge issue, so that might not be a great test. But for the most part, I think that's kind of what you can expect from the game, is that in those first two series, great tests on offense and defense. The second series, some really good tests, and then the third team, it's third teamers. Who knows? Who cares?
Who cares? So we are going to go to the mailbag, and apologies, this episode is running a little bit quicker than than especially last episode, where that one just kind of, I'd say, dragged on forever. But it was a decent show. It just, by the end of it, we were both done with life. So, but we are going to move this along just a little bit, and we are going to move to the mailbag. And starting off with Luke Braun, who asks, which team should I bandwagon because the Vikings are going 0-16 this year?
The Vikings' offensive line is injured, and as the offensive line goes, the team goes. Mm-hmm. That's why the Seahawks have not won a Super Bowl yet.
Except for the
No, that's no offensive line, no Super Bowl. So that's it.
God, the Seahawks look terrible this year.
They do,
Holy
actually.
crap!
Yeah. The team you should bandwagon on, I would say not the Patriots.
I think the Rams. I think the Rams are.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Are probably your best bet on that. They'll likely get a little bit.
Marcus Peters, Dominican's that's some action.
Yeah, there's minus the unlikability of Ndamukong Suh. Like that's a pretty good. That's a pretty heavy stacked team, so that should be pretty interesting. So if you're looking for a team to watch in the 3-15 range, try the Rams. That they might surprise you. Next question is from Ian, who asks, "What would be better? What world would be better than one where Zimmer has a burner account making up rumors like trading Barr, signing Incognito before squashing them, or just to simply troll Vikings Twitter? I, for one, cannot think of one." So basically, wouldn't that be the best idea ever?
That would be amazing. The only thing is he'd have to find a way to have enough followers for this to make sense. So first he'd have to tweet out things that were going to happen that did end up happening.
Right.
So he'd have a track record of being right, and then tweet at different
fans
and different
He'd be
writers.
the opposite of Kevin at that point, then.
Right? Yeah. And then after he's established that he's got some sort of insight into the team, then start tweeting out oh, by the way, I called. That they were going to play this many plays. I called that they were going to open with this play. I called that, they were going to cut this player.
Yeah,
by the way, they're going to trade Anthony Barr.
Yeah, exactly. Their fifth play this year, and their script's 20, or their fifth play of this game is going to be this. Also, Anthony Barr was caught with a prostitute the other day, and the team is covering it up. What? I just want to see it. And what would make it better is if the avatar was a picture of Mike Zimmer with the pirate,
with the mustache.
No, with the pirate
Oh yes.
Yeah, covering up the one eye. That would make that better. I like that idea. Can we trade Terrence Newman for a guard? Asks Zen Cupid. I don't know if he's going to survive the cuts.
Okay, so I know this cannot possibly happen because if you think about it like this. What team would want to trade for Newman if Newman is only here because of two things? One, he wants a Super Bowl ring. Two, he specifically values the relationship he has with Mike Zimmer. If the Vikings trade Terrence Newman, he simply will retire. There's no reason for a team to trade for him. So he doesn't have any value except to the Vikings, right? So no team is ever going to trade for Terrence Newman, which means that which means that the Vikings are not going to trade him. So I guess on paper, the 1,000-foot view, that actually I think is a really good idea. Trading away a depth piece of your really super stacked secondary that's aging, that's not going to be on your roster for very long, that you don't need to develop in order to get immediate help when you're putting your push in for a Super Bowl season. I think that makes a lot of sense. But from the perspective of what's actually happening, it makes no sense because Newman would just retire. We've traded him for Ronald Leary or whatever, right? And he's a starting quality guard. And then Newman's wow, the Broncos are really cool and they've got this great secondary and I don't know any of them. Bye.
Yeah. You're oh, you're great, but you're not Zimmer. So, bye.
Yeah.
We're good here. Tyler Wick asks, I'm wondering how you think the offense will fare if the O-line is as bad as the 2016 group. How will it be different? How does Kirk compare to Sam if we're forced into a bunch of quick throws? And do you think that you would rather have Dalvin Cook taking checkdowns over Jerick McKinnon?
Well, weirdly, McKinnon had better hands last year than Cook, despite the fact that McKinnon entered the league with a drop problem and Cook did not. or concerns about drops, right? Because he had these really tiny hands. It was like the only thing on his mock draftable chart that was not at like full blast 100. But yeah, aside from that, I mean, yeah, I guess I'd rather have Cook. I mean, McKinnon tests super well, and he ended up expressing that testing as, I think, a really phenomenal athlete and a pretty decent running back. And obviously he got paid like more than just a pretty decent running back. But like Cook, who did not test all that well, looks like, and your eyes can lie to you, but looks like a more impressive athlete, especially in space. So yeah, I'd rather have Cook catching those passes. Was there another part of that question?
There was. If the offensive line is as bad as 2016, is Kirk Cousins going to be able to survive back there?
I know. Okay, so Cousins is better at avoiding pressure and just generally more mobile than Sam Bradford. Not that that's like an enormous bar to clear or anything like that. Like, don't trip over that bar you set. But it's still like a problem. Like, he rushes his process under pressure. Like, so there's a bunch of people who've been asking, like, hey, actually his numbers under pressure don't look that bad. Like, if you take a look at his Pro Football Focus passer rating, or you take a look at his adjusted yards per attempt under pressure, they're actually not that bad. And I kind of get where the criticism of his play under pressure comes from now that I've watched a bunch of him and now that I watch him live, is that he definitely rushes his process. And especially with a new team, it's difficult for him to rush his process and know where his receivers are going to be. He's a very structured quarterback who can't improvise very well, where Case Keenum was a remarkable improviser, which is kind of why you could play those sandlot plays with Thielen. But he's not that. And so if that gets taken away, that's just a problem. And I think we will see his play under pressure express into those poor numbers under pressure, because his subjective film traits don't seem to match up with what those numerical traits are. And now that I have seen a lot of those kind of film traits, and some of those numbers are kind of lying, right? Because they happen on 3rd and 15, and then he gets like a 9-yard pass that improves his yards per attempt, right? And that was a product of rushing his process, and he should have been able to convert, given that there was an open receiver here, like stuff like that. So yeah, that would be a problem in a really huge way. If it's 2016 bad, which I think was a worse offensive line that was treated better by Shermer, but a worse offensive line than either the offensive lines Bridgewater had. But there was less pressure because A, Bradford gets the ball out quicker, but B, you didn't have Norv Turner anymore. Then yeah, it's you're in a catastrophic situation. But at least Cousins can like scramble, which is a new element that Bradford did not have.
No, Bradford could barely move, and it'd be kind of ridiculous to ask him to. Ben Balser, sure. Arif, do you ever intend to bring back the salary cap league? Oh, God.
Oh, geez, no. I really screwed that up. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah, let us never speak of it again. This one is from Curly Fry, who asks, favorite guy from camp so far?
I guess Hughes. Johnny Stanton has to, like, I'm just going to pick a guy that I haven't talked about a lot, because I've talked about my favorite performances, like, Griffin and Hughes and Eric Wilson, whatever. I haven't talked about Johnny Stanton, who's a fullback, so maybe he's not worth talking about. But to the extent that you should be able to talk about fullbacks, he looks really good. Like, we've had a lot of players convert to fullback from other positions. CJ Ham, of course, did that, and he looked fine. But we had Zach Line do that, and he was not very good at it. We've brought in like other people to do that, like Ryan D'Imperio and Blake Renaud and a couple of other players kind of convert to fullback, and they just don't look good. And Stanton looks like a really competent fullback. Like, he hasn't been beaten for blocks too often. When he has, it's usually been like Eric Wilson, but for the most part, he's done a really good job, not just meeting who he needs to meet at the hole, but creating extra space for the running back. So that's super cool. It's like kind of old school football that doesn't matter anymore, but aesthetically it's cool. But I've already talked about kind of my favorite performances, so I just decided I want to bring up something that. So I didn't answer your question. I instead answered the question I prefer to answer.
And really, isn't that all that really matters?
Right.
Billy Dine asks, although it at least initially thought he would be a camp body, is there any chance Edison makes the roster with the current injuries? And how has he looked in camp so far?
Yeah, Edison's moved up the depth chart in response to injuries, and he could make the roster. And he's looked all right in camp. I think he kind of leapfrogged the guy that was ahead of him. Trying to remember the name right now. 64 plays 64. Whoever plays number 64. I don't know why I don't know that right now.
Is this one of those your kingdom for the answer?
Yeah, right. I'm just looking up.
Josh Andrews.
Yeah. So he's playing. So he kind of leapfrogged Josh Andrews, who's playing as the second team center, and he's looked all right, but and he's done a better job against like some of the backup nose tackles, like Curtis Cothran and David Perry, and to some extent Julio Johnson. But he's getting like just pistol whipped by Linval, which maybe pistol is the wrong term to use because Linval did get shot, but. A couple years ago, but yeah, I mean, he's getting destroyed by Linval Joseph. That's to be expected, I guess. So yeah, I could definitely see him making the roster, especially when you enter the season with like worries along the interior.
Question from Bill Botke. He asks, given how advanced analytical studies have become, I'm surprised that selecting a good wide receiver in the draft is so difficult. Arif's consensus board was favorable to receivers like Devontae Parker, Corey Coleman, and Laquan Treadwell, but they have all underwhelmed. Why are NFL draft experts so mediocre at identifying the top talent at wide receiver? What are the analytical studies missing?
I would say that they're not necessarily any worse at receiver than they are at any other position. So I think that's kind of the first thing to kind of clarify. I mean, like we do have differing hit rates based off of position, and like you're more likely to hit later in the draft on say like a running back than you are at like another position. But I would say it's kind of like compared to what, right? And I think that the NFL overall is probably better at identifying top talent than it was 20 years ago. I don't know if it was than 10 years ago, but I think it was better than at 20 years ago. And if you go back, like if you take a look at like some of the legends of the past, obviously the 60s and 70s, you'll see like a bunch of like, this guy was a 13th round pick. And you're like, what? How? He like destroyed in college and then he destroyed in the NFL. It's like, how was he a 13th round pick? And it's like, oh, well, you know, teams were like, he was ugly, so teams like didn't like him. Like, you're like, oh, yeah, sure, fine.
The team would bring him to the beach, and the people would ask him what they used for bait. He was just an ugly, ugly man.
But yeah, I would say that they've gotten better, and then maybe they've stalled a little bit at getting much better since then. But I think the problem is that teams are kind of advancing along an equal plane. And so when Team A gets better at evaluating, teams like B through Z, I guess just more than 2016s, but you know what I mean, will in a couple of years be that good at evaluating kind of that aspect of that thing. So there's that. And because it's an auction, you know, you tend to kind of crowd out, you know, individuals in terms of being able to select better players. That should, in theory, end up producing like better overall first round picks. And I would say that maybe you've kind of done that, except at the offensive line position. But I don't think that they're not necessarily just bad at it. I think that it's a question of like compared to what, and projection is just super difficult. And some things are kind of hard to predict. Like Antonio Callaway, who hit the news today, probably would have been a second round pick if it weren't for his off the field issues. And a lot of people praise the Browns for trading up to get him in the fourth round because they got a second round or maybe even a first round quality receiver in the fourth round. And then, well, this is why. It's because he kind of busted, right?
Yeah, as it turns out, it's going to bite him in the ass.
Right. And so there are receivers that maybe deserve to be picked kind of in the second round, but they're just so clean that compared to maybe a bunch of other receivers, you know, they're the best ones. And so then you pick them maybe in the first round or something along those lines. Like you have to figure out kind of psychology and what kind of motivates them. Like one of the reasons Joey Harrington, you know, sucked in the NFL, for example, is because he cared a lot about college football, and he loved college football, and he like grew up wanting to play in the Rose Bowl, and he had a dream of playing in the Rose Bowl, and he kind of just didn't care. He didn't have any long-term aspirations for the NFL. So he just kind of didn't care once he entered the NFL. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other reasons, like, you know, I'm sure like if Joe Montana like did not care a ton about the NFL, he would have been like a pretty good quarterback. But like, yeah, I think that's kind of difficult to predict. Like, it's not like Harrington was going around telling, you know, GMs like, you know what, I'm not really into professional football. Like, you wouldn't do that, right?
So really, can I just be a backup in college for the next 5 years? Like,
right. Some of these things are just like really difficult to predict, and we're used to also casting a wider net, and that'll cause problems too, right? Like now we're looking at, we're doing a better job of looking at like FCS and Division II and Division III players, and sometimes we're even drafting them in the first and second rounds, like Ali Marpet. We're Adam Shaheen, the tight end for the Bears. In casting a wider net. And having the ability to evaluate all that film is also going to make it more difficult for you to kind of localize what you need. It's a really long answer, but it's a complicated question.
Well, it's a very complicated question, but Bill Botke's questions tend to be very, very in-depth like that. Matt Nelson asks, how many points a game does the Vikings defense need to score so everyone gives Zimmer a pass for not drafting a guard in the first round? And how many does Mike Hughes personally have to score?
I think... If he scores 14, or I guess 12 because he doesn't kick. Although remember that proposed rule where the person who crosses the end zone has to be the one who kicks the extra point. I'd love it.
Oh God, that would cause such havoc in our league. We would have to retire it. There would be no playing it.
It would be amazing. Well, we would then have to have like team kicker.
Yeah.
And oh my God, that would be amazing. Okay, so I get 12 points for Hughes, so that it could include a pick six and a punt return touchdown. And then the defense, probably 12 more points, I guess. And people will be like, oh, the defense scored 3 touchdowns this year. That's a lot. Maybe that makes up for the pressure we lost for not having offensive linemen or something. I don't know.
Maybe.
So, some people are just never going to give him a pass, and maybe I'm one of them.
Somewhere in the middle of the year, we're going to see that uprising in Vikings Twitter saying, we really should have given Richie Incognito a chance on the team.
Right.
Like, it's coming. I promise you that it is coming. Nathan Holtz asks, will we ever see Adrian Peterson play again? I think we'll see him on the field once, probably to accept his honor into like the Ring of Honor and like a Hall of Fame ceremony, but I don't know if we'll ever see him play again.
Yeah, I think that's done.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. Drunken Vike asks, has Boone nabbed the running back 3 position, and can you envision him playing a role on the field for the team this year?
I don't think it's like his to lose or anything. In fact, I think Mac Brown is still listed on him ahead of him on the depth chart, but I do think he's kind of in the lead position there. I am not confident of him in a world where like Cook goes down, though. Like, I don't think he would be a great running back. I think that he's a really interesting pass catching option. I wouldn't say like I'm overly enthusiastic about it or anything.
He also asks, I suppose this is more of a question for me, what is the best meal one can get in Grand Forks? It's no Minneapolis, but there has to be some good food somewhere, right? Yeah, well, it's where I live and run around, so let's get a couple things out of the way. The Parrots K has amazing wings. I tend to prefer the Shark 10s, which is a mixture of their buffalo, like their buffalo wings or typical wings, and barbecue sauce, and that's delicious. And at the level of 10, it's not at the point where it's going to kill you, but you're definitely going to end up feeling it later. So I really like that. Little Bangkok, which is in East Grand Forks, so technically in Minnesota, I realize, but everyone who lives here knows that like Minnesota doesn't really start until you get to like the beet plant or the pet cemetery out on like Highway 2. So, but the Little Bangkok has pretty good sushi, and it used to be a Drunken Noodle. So their noodle dishes and soups are quite good. Ellie's Ivy.
If only they had never gotten rid of the Royal Fork.
Oh God. There's like not, the Sears that open next to that is also closed, so there's just death in that whole section of Columbia Mall. It's pretty ridiculous. It's almost like when Target left and then paid to stay in that space to kill that section of the mall.
God.
For like 15 years. That was true insanity. Hub Pub is really good in downtown. They have an amazing Baja Taco. Other than that, there's Toasted Frog is kind of a staple. Ellie's Ivy is really good. Blue Moose in East Grand Forks is phenomenal. Helix is newer. It's on the south end of town. And if you're looking for some amazing fried rice, you can go to Xingya whenever it's like open, and you can get fried rice there. They also have sushi, but it's not as good as the fried rice. And you can get it as spicy as you want, and they will hurt you. Regardless of your skin, like the shade of your skin, they will hurt you. So
equal opportunity spice.
Well, I've told this. I think I've told the story before, but I went to an Indian place in Roseville with a buddy of mine who is very clearly Mexican, and we went there, and it was one of the first times I'd ever ordered a chicken tikka masala, and he just and my buddy goes, tell the cook to hurt me. Tell him I made fun of his mom. Just tell him to hurt me. And I said, and then I ordered, and I said I wanted exactly as spicy as he got. So the chef came, or the waiter came back and whispered in my buddy's ear, "Are you sure he wants it you guys' hot or his hot?" It's like, nah, he's not messing around, man. He wants it my hot. Okay, but like, you get that some places.
Yeah.
I'm not calling it white privilege. It's probably the opposite of white privilege,
it would
really.
be the opposite in this case.
But anyway, they are equal opportunity killers, so they will burn you quite well with the fried rice at Xingya. I like the barbecue pork one there. Alex Goebel asks, has Arif sabotaged my entry into the Norse Code League already?
Can't sabotage something that's not there. What's the next question?
How can you avoid... How do you avoid football Sunday fatigue? I love the sport, but I have a really hard time watching a full day of it without feeling like butts sometime in the late afternoon.
I don't know. You could probably watch one of the games while working out, like at the gym. I've got the game on at the gym.
I've done that. I've also done the thing where, like, you just kind of make sure that you get up once or twice a quarter. And that little period of time between the first game and the second game, really try to, like, move around. No gigantic meals. This is a grazing situation.
Yeah.
Grazing is key here.
Yeah, and then also between the Sunday night game and the last afternoon game, like, just do something. Like, you don't have a ton of time, obviously, but, like, just do something. Like, I've been in this situation, and I do it for my job. Yeah. And I still have the feeling like, I should just get up and leave. Dan Patrick is not that captivating where you have to sit and watch his, like, recap. Right. So, no, just get up, move, do something to kind of move things around, and stay hydrated. The beer is good, but remember to get a glass of water every once in a while, and just that will help with the fatigue a little bit. He's probably not going to be in the Norse Code League. Mike Ellis asks, if the Easton injury is serious, what is your favorite craft brew to wash away the pain? Usually, when I'm at a bar, I usually ask for whatever their darkest is, and if they've got a nitro version of that. But when I get that, I have been pleasantly surprised with left-hand milk stouts. That really is a bit of an acquired taste. The like creamy aspect of that is, I love it.
Can be off-putting to some people, but if you really like it, it's one of those things where you can't live without it. Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah,
it's not even the same drink as an IPA. Like, I don't know how they're both beers, but
it's like the situation of, like, looking at Shaq and looking at Shaq's wife. Like, this is the same. This is the same animal, technically. It's just
right.
Like, this is the same species. I've been I'm on the show before. I've mentioned my like for like Breckenridge Brewery out of Colorado and the stuff they've put out. I tend to drink kind of as dark as I can, especially the imperial stouts. So I tend to go kind of more that way. But the vanilla, when it gets colder, when it gets more to football season, I like the imperial Imperial stuff, but the Breckenridge oatmeal stout or the Breckenridge vanilla porter, and they make a nitro out of that, and it's delicious.
Oh, and if you're suffering from Sunday fatigue, do not get these beers.
No. Dark beer will fill you up, and you will be let down. Also, how do you feel about a cooking podcast? After your last show, I made some cowboy butter for corn on the cob. Any other good cooking tips? See, cowboy butter is delicious. It's just poorly named.
I didn't say it wasn't delicious. In fact, when you described it, it sounded delicious. It's just extraordinarily poorly named.
Extraordinarily poorly named. It's just so delicious, and it's good on tons of things, from everything from like corn to basting a lobster on, which we'll talk to a little bit later. But any other random cooking things? I made a chicken this evening that I was marinating in cherry Dr. Pepper for like 24 hours. That was different. I really liked it.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I'm finding myself cooking more with Dr. Pepper and Coke lately, like a Dr. Pepper pulled pork, like in a crock pot, is really, really, really good. I'm enjoying that. What's your? Do you have anything random that you've made recently that would kind of be a bit odd, but still delicious?
We haven't cooked as much in the past couple of weeks, so.
Well, you're not spending your time out in the middle of, I say nowhere, but you're not spending your time down south, so you're not doing as much crock potting, I imagine.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot less of that. We made a shepherd's pie.
Ooh.
Not super recently, but that stuff is so good. Like, I highly recommend doing that and making it. And one of the things that tends to go wrong for people, especially if it's like a true shepherd's pie with lamb, instead of whatever the other thing I forget is called, cottage pie, I think, is they overcook the lamb, and so it kind of gets gritty and grainy. Whereas if you turn the sauce into kind of a gravy and don't overcook the lamb when it's ground up, it can taste just amazing. So yeah, that's my recommendation. Also, little peas and carrots in there, which that's normally what people do, but I'm just saying, great move, everybody.
I actually had to impress some kids the other day, so my decision was to make a burger from the show Bob's Burgers, and I just happened to have a little cookbook that was given to me by a friend that had like a bunch of recipes from the show. So that was kind of cool to go through, and I found one that was actually really delicious. And what you're doing is basically you're making a bruschetta and putting it atop the burger. So you end up making the bruschetta from scratch, or if get it from the store or whatever, balsamic vinegar and tomatoes and a little bit of garlic and basil. And you put it on, traditionally you would put it on, or according to the show, on French bread. I just put it on a bun and then put mozzarella on top of that. And it was so delicious. For whatever reason, balsamic vinegar on a burger with like that was just so good. It's very, very highly recommended. Plus, if they like the show, they can just sit there and be amazed, like, wow, we're eating something that was put on a show. This is kind of cool. Yay, Beef Squatch. Fine episode. Don from Ohio asks, how many touchdown passes will Sluter throw this weekend? I have the over-under at 15.
Well, I'm going to take the under.
You sound so cautious. Are you sure that this is a wise choice?
I don't want to overplay any bets.
Well, no.
I don't want to go too far in.
Absolutely
but
not.
I would say based off of the fact that Sluter hasn't looked as good in this camp as he did last year in preseason, is that maybe we should kind of ratchet down our expectations. Probably even less than 13, honestly, if I'm going to be completely frank with Don from Ohio. It's not looking great.
I also am going to take the under on this one. I think that 15 is a bit ambitious. Especially if you get like 14 and then it gets like called back.
Oh
like,
yeah, I can see that happening.
I mean, these things happen.
Classic situation.
The refs are also in the preseason, so they're kind of getting back into it. So,
yeah, right. Yeah,
we have to factor all of the other like things going on.
Yeah, so. Kind of the marginal stuff that chips away at the touchdown total. Yeah.
I swear to Christ, if Sluter throws 15 touchdowns this weekend, I don't know exactly how I would react other than like he would have to be proclaimed like the new god of Minnesota or something, or he would just own Denver, which is also true. I mean, Case Keenum owns Tampa Bay, so
right. Yeah, Case Keenum can walk into any of the many strip clubs they have,
and there are many,
right? And walk around like he owns the place because he does.
He does.
And get free drinks. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah.
Final question from him is best combination of steak and seafood. I am doing surf and turf this weekend, and price is no issue. Apparently, he's doing quite well for himself. He must have figured out what was causing the power outages in his RV. I don't know if you saw that video on Twitter. There was a video that Don from Ohio posted inside of his RV, and it was freaking out. And he couldn't figure out why like the lights in there just kept like going off and on and off and on and off and on. It was almost like a light switch strobe. Like when like little kids are going on the wall. It was a bit like that, but it was just freaking out. So apparently he must have that fixed and now wants to celebrate with surf and turf.
The best surf and turf. It's surf and turf, man. What's your favorite seafood? Now get the best steak.
It's gonna be like tuna and skirt steak.
Hey, skirt steak's not bad.
It's not bad, but the combination of it would be, atrocious.
Then A5 Wagyu, which is super fatty. It's not very like beefy.
Well, yes.
It's also insanely expensive, but you asked for what the best combination was, so
and price was not a problem.
Right. So A5 Wagyu is super fatty.
Yes.
And I think as long as you don't have like 8 ounces of it, I think it would pair well with a bunch of different seafoods.
That steak is going to be more expensive than the RV.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make
Price
sure.
Price is not an object. So that, and then to me, a butter-soaked lobster sounds great with that.
Cowboy butter is great on a lobster.
I would want to kind of A/B test the pure butter versus the cowboy butter, I think, in that situation.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, A5 Wagyu, which I think probably pairs super well with seafood, especially like the high cholesterol shellfish type stuff like lobster.
Yeah. No, my big thing in that sort of instance is I tend to like ribeyes more than anything else, just because like the marbling and how it ends up tasting. And if you're going to go with something that's a bit healthier, even though you're going to put a bunch of butter on it, like seafood, I'm going to go with something a little bit fattier. So I would end up going with a nice ribeye, depending on if it's already aged or not. And then I would probably go with probably a smaller lobster, just to because that steak is going to do its best to fill me up. That's what I'm thinking. But I also don't own a haunted RV, so what do I know? Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We will be back next week to talk about our likely victory over the Denver Broncos and talk a bit more about training camp and a few other things. Arif, what do you have to plug this week?
So I'm finishing up on like a notebook over the past sort of week of practices that's going to have observations on every player on the roster, so that you can kind of track the progress as we head into kind of this next preseason game. So that's what I'm plugging.
That is what you're plugging. And also, if you would like to get behind the paywall, how would you do that?
Well, you go to zonecoverage.com. And there's 2 ways you could get behind the paywall. You could either get a normal subscription, which is kind of at the top. You click on subscribe, you pay $24 for the year, and that's cool. That's fine. Or you could get the Training Camp Guide subscription, which costs $4 less.
It's
and
the
is only
Super
running,
Mega Maxi with Wings edition of the subscription.
Yeah, that's not the descriptor I would have chosen, but is fine for our purposes. And while both get you access to the guide, this one is $4 cheaper for the year. So you could do that, get access to every scouting report that I've put out from before training camp, for all the players that are on the roster, get information about sort of like what I think about, having developmental players, how to watch drills. If you do go to training camp, there's a section just on those drills, and stuff like that. And also it gets you access to all kinds of stuff that we'll have throughout the year. So we've got draft analysis for both the NBA and the NFL kind of behind that paywall. We'll have, stuff about the Wild behind that paywall. And so on. So yeah, it's super cheap, I think, in terms of a subscription service, and you get access to a bunch of really cool content, and you support my work.
So if you'd like to support Arif's work, you can go there, or you can also go to patreon.com/NorseCode or paypal.me/NorseCode and contribute there. That goes directly to the show and does not get you any of the finer things over at Zone Coverage, just as a disclaimer. But that is going to be it for this week's show. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you so much, and we are looking for a new thing to say at the end of the show. So go ahead and send those in. We are always looking for something, but until Matt Khalil opens his mouth again and says something really funny, we are going to play until the clock hits 0. And we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.